I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss the latest updates from the battlefront, analyse more worrying developments at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and we talk about the dire situation in Somalia and how it's linked with a conflict in Eastern Europe thousands of miles away.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Tuesday, the 6th of September, day 195. And today I'm joined by Associate Editor Dominic Nichols, Senior Foreign Correspondent Roland Oliphant, and our Global Health Security Correspondent, Sarah Newey. I started by asking Dom for his take on the Ukrainian counterattack.
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. I will talk about the south, but we do need to knit that to the east and the north as well. But I'll explain what I mean there. So in the south, it looks like the Ukrainian push in the area of Kherson is continuing. Remember, this looks like a four-pronged push along the coast road to Kherson, the road directly from Mykolaiv to Kherson, one in the center of the area around the sort of Inelets River, and then one a little bit further to the east. Now, it looks as if that push in the center is producing some better results than the others. Now, none of these are a full-fronted race at the Russian lines, because that would just be crazy, and they would lose too many personnel, too much equipment. It seems to be a push, as we said some weeks ago, sort of the giant Jenga thing, to see which area is the weakest and then back that area and reinforce that success. It looks like the bit down the Inelets River seems to be producing some kind of results. Now, whether or not that's the main effort, the Ukrainian main effort for the region, we don't know. It might make sense to do that, because if they cut off the Inelets River, which runs north to south, if they manage to push down there to the Dnipro, they would cut off swathes, thousands of Russian troops in the east of that pocket. They would then be militarily insignificant, and it would also then enable them to turn west and start biting off a bit more, sort of a clear bite, hold, secure type strategy. So there is progress being made there. Now, there's reports that in the region, so south down the Inelets River, the Derivka Dam has been reported as dropped. Now, this is still to be confirmed, but that is a major crossing point over the Inelets River. So, for example, if you are Russia and you are trying to support your troops in that pocket north and west of the Dnipro River, and in particular in Kherson city itself, you need first of all to get over the Dnipro, and a lot of the bridges there, or the two bridges near Kherson, have been dropped or are no longer secure for heavy military traffic. So they've got to go over the Novokarivka Dam, the bridge there at the dam, and then turn west, and travel for about 60 or 70 k's to get to Kherson city. Now that route takes you over the Derivka Dam on the Inelets River, and that, as I say, has been reportedly damaged/destroyed today. Now, like I say, unverified at present, but that would make sense that would further cut off any Russian troops north and west of the Dnipro, and it would also lend credence to that idea that central push down the Inelets is bearing fruit for Ukraine. So that seems to be the situation in the south. Now, in the east, in the Donbass, that's still very heavily active there. Russia is still making small incremental advances. UK Defence Intelligence think that is still Russia's main effort in terms of their operational push, because they want to take the whole of the Luhansk and the Donetsk oblasts to claim that they've then liberated the Donbass. So that's thought to be Russia's main effort. They are somewhat derided, if you like, as only progressing a few hundred meters a day or a kilometre a week. Which is not great, obviously, but we've been saying that for quite a few weeks now. So, if it's, let's say, 8 weeks at least, we've been saying that. So if Russia have pushed the whole front since taking Severodonetsk in the area, the whole front by sort of 8 to 10 k's, I mean, small, not great, but it is constant. So we just need to keep an eye on that. However, right in the middle of that area, you've got the Severodonetsk River and the town of Azhern. Please forgive me if I pronounce that incorrectly, but Azhern's about 20 k's east of Sloviansk. And this is an area where Ukraine claims to have conducted an amphibious crossing across the Severodonetsk River, and taken a pocket of land on the north side. Reasons why unclear. Now hold that thought as well for just one moment. I'm nearly finished. Just this very quick update. So bear with me for a moment. Move to the north. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, been under pretty much constant shelling throughout the since the war started, or this phase of the war started on February the 24th. Hit again overnight. Residential buildings were hit. 3 people confirmed killed so far. Others likely and wounded, but that was overnight. But again, in the north, there's reports that Ukraine have been pushing against the Russian lines there. Now, all that might make good, solid military sense that Ukraine is pushing back in every area, the north, the east, and the south, trying to reclaim territory wherever they can. But of course, unless you've got a huge number of resources, a huge amount of resource, you can't do that. And we don't think Ukraine has a huge amount of resource. Likewise, Russia, very, very limited on what it can muster. So in order to push into these areas, if these reports are accurate, that is very interesting. It doesn't make a huge strategic sense because they're asking to be pushed back. But what it does do is it makes Russia have to second guess. And if Russia's main effort is in the Donbass, and if Ukraine have managed to do an amphibious assault across the river and taken a pocket of land near the town of Izern, if they are pushing back in the north, then Russia has to tie forces down in those areas. They can't deploy everything to the south into the Kherson region, which seems at the moment to be Ukraine's operational main effort. So the biggest fight they're trying to pick right now, basically. And it's worth just very briefly talking about the difference in what the military mean by a feint and a demonstration. So a feint and a demonstration are two different types of operational activity. They are designed to draw the enemy's eye away from your main effort, or they could be the mother of all diversions and actually turn out to be your main attack. But what they are designed to do is to tie down the enemy's forces, either just by watching what you're doing, which is a demonstration where you conduct an operation where you're not seeking contact with the enemy. You're not trying to get into a fight. You're not trying to definitely trying to preserve your own personnel and your equipment. But you are literally demonstrating to the enemy that you have capability, either to show them that you're still able to mount a specific type of attack, such as an amphibious crossing, or just to tie down their surveillance assets and some of their firepower, because they've got to hold that risk. They've got to create a threat. Obviously, Russia has to hold a threat against these potential risks. Now, a feint is subtly different in that you are still trying to draw the enemy's eye away, but you are actively seeking contact. And this is very, very tricky, because what you have to do is you have to pick a very limited objective, which might be the purpose of this amphibious assault in the centre and might be the purpose of this pushback in Kharkiv in the north. You are actively seeking contact with the enemy, but on a very limited for a very limited objective, to draw away the enemy's fire from your main objective. In this case, I'm suggesting that is probably the fight in Kherson. Now, the point about a feint is that you have to resource it. It has to look real. It has to look like you are actually trying to push through there. And of course, you are asking men and women to risk and in many, many cases give up their lives for ultimately a diversion. So this calls for immense leadership skills and logistic skills, but more so the leadership skills. It's one thing to lead men and women into battle if they're highly motivated and they're willing to risk their lives in a great cause. Now, if that great cause, or if a subset of that great cause is actually, guys, this is just a diversion away from the main fight in the south, it really strains leadership and strains teams and strains military organizations to back that to the hilt that is needed in order to deceive the enemy. Now, all of that was a bit of a ramble. I apologize, it went on for a little bit, but I'm just wondering what these things are, what's happening in the center and the north. It's a lot easier to sit on the defensive, and when I say easier, that's with a very small e, because it is not easy to defend against the Russian army or any army that wants to do you ill. But it is militarily easier to be on the defensive. So to push forward, to actively push forward, is very interesting. And I'm trying to think out why they would do that. And to me, it all plays into this push in the south, just keeping Russia's focus not only in Kherson but also in the east and the north. Just trying to think, what are they doing? Can Russia afford to withdraw forces from the north to reinforce what's happening in Kherson? No, they can't, because if Ukraine pushes through at Kharkiv, then they threaten the supply lines coming down through Russia down into the Donbass. Can Russia afford to shift its main effort away from the Donbass to the south? Again, absolutely not, because it then is even further away from its vaunted aim of liberating the Donbass. So I think what we're seeing, I'm willing to cast to one side, consider and then immediately cast aside that it's either luck or it's just Ukrainian taking advantage of a lull, just chancing their arm. I don't think they're daft enough to do that. They need to preserve their combat power. I don't think they'd be doing these sorts of things just on a whim, if you like. I don't think I'm overthinking it. Maybe. I see them all connected. I think I see them all part of the same campaign plan, and that to me. And maybe I'm a little bit starry-eyed because I don't like what Russia's doing. But I think this is very, very clever. And if Ukraine is able to muster these limited feints, like I say, asking men and women to risk their lives for a great bluff, and Ukraine feels that they are strong enough, they have the leadership, and they have the trust in the political direction and the military chain of command to get people up and out the trenches and forwards to do that kind of thing. That is very impressive. And if it's all knitted together in order to take heat off the southern offensive in Kherson, where they do seem to be having some success with these attacks around Kherson, then I think that is actually very clever tradecraft.
Well, thank you very much, Dom. That was extremely comprehensive, and it's good to have you back. Let's go on. One of the big focuses we want to talk about today is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The Ukrainian energy minister has said that the world is unfortunately once again on the brink of nuclear disaster. Roland Oliphant, what's happening in the ZNPP?
Right, so this power station has been on our radars, since the beginning of the war, and as we all know, over the past couple of months, it has become a flashpoint. It's been subject to shelling on the power station itself nearby. Russia's blamed Ukraine has blamed Russia. They're both accusing one another of basically raising the possibility of some kind of nuclear disaster as a kind of blackmail. The Ukrainians say Russia is trying to blackmail Ukraine and the West. Russia says Ukraine is trying to blackmail everybody else, so on. So we had the IAEA down there last week. That seemed to calm things down. There was no shelling, and then everything went wrong again yesterday. So there was a fire in a nearby forest which forced them to shut down the last remaining backup line connecting the power station to the national grid. And this is dangerous, it turns out. I now understand after speaking to nuclear scientists. So nuclear power stations are not meant to rely on themselves for their electricity, and especially for cooling the reactors and cooling their spent fuel pools and all that essential stuff. And the idea is if you have to turn off the reactor itself, it still has to be cooled, so there's going to have to be a backup system of power anyway. And there are many, many layers. In modern nuclear power stations, including Zaporizhzhia, there are many places you get that power. So Zaporizhzhia has I think 4 main power lines. It has the backup line. There is a thermal power plant next door, which can pump stuff in. If all that goes down, they've got multiple diesel generators. But you're not meant to have to use all that. So yesterday, this fire cut the last remaining backup power line. That was the one leading to the thermal power plant. The power station was cut off from the grid for the second time in its history. The first time was on the 25th of August, just a couple of weeks ago. They came very close, according to a guy we spoke to working there, they came very, very close to having to switch to diesel generation. They did switch reactor 6, bring it down to a low level, and switch reactor 6 solely to powering the plant and for cooling. And I think that it's probably back on the grid by now. We were certainly told last night that that backup power line was not damaged. It had been shut down as a precaution, and as soon as the fire was out, it would be turned on. So there we have it. Another scare. both sides again will blame one another. The Energoatom, the Ukrainian nuclear operator, is very clearly blaming Russia for the shelling that started the fire. But what's really alarming is actually how this seems to be undermining the very, very comprehensive safety kind of procedures, all these safeguards that nuclear power stations have. So I was speaking to Edward Lyman, who's the director of nuclear power safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists in Washington, and he said, it looks like people are describing it as a slow motion train wreck or plane crash. Like everybody can see what's happening, and absolutely everybody knows how to stop it and how to make the power station safe. Right? Everybody knows what to do. There are lots of rules. It's just somehow nobody seems to be doing it. So the first thing to do is to secure that connection to the grid, but it keeps on going down. Okay. Then you've got these diesel generators. If those run out of fuel, if they have to turn on, we think they did have to turn on back on August 25th. If they are taken down, then there are other emergency backup equipment. They've got these petrol or diesel-powered pumps that you'd be manually putting water into the reactors and so on. So you've got all these different layers of protection. But if they all go down because, say, the generators run out of fuel or shelling keeps on cutting the power lines, or workers can't actually get to these emergency pumps or so on and so forth, eventually you will get to a point where fuel cores start to warm up. And it doesn't happen quickly. It can take hours. It probably take days. But eventually you will end up with what they basically call a meltdown. And you'll have, big lump of molten nuclear fuel falling to the bottom of the reactor container, burning its way through. And you've got 6 reactors in Zaporizhzhia. It's the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. So bizarrely, it is meant to be a safe place, but that safety, I've realised after the conversations I was having yesterday, kind of presupposes there isn't going to be a war. And even though all these extra safeguards were put in after Fukushima and so on, if this kind of thing keeps happening, if you keep pushing these safeguards a little bit further and a little bit further, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're closer and closer and closer to there is no more safety measure. And things are going to go wrong. So that is why people are so alarmed about this. As I say, at the moment, for now, disaster averted. But if this keeps happening, we are right to be very nervous.
Thanks, Roland. I mean, we've had Hamish Breton-Gordon on here a few times talking about the situation at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. As you said, this keeps on cropping up for the past few weeks. It's been an issue we've had to return to because something else has happened and something else has happened and something's gone down and something's moved on to the emergency systems. So when you're talking to your sources and when you're writing your story yesterday, how concerned do they sound? I mean, we've got the language here from German Galashenko, who says, once again on the brink of nuclear disaster. You gave us the quote from the safety expert saying it's a slow-moving train wreck. But when you talk to them, what's your impression of how worried they are?
So it really depends. So if you talk to people who are not there, nuclear scientists or experts looking on from the outside, first you tend to be reassured that, this is not Chernobyl, because I think scientists get a bit fed up with people comparing everything to Chernobyl. This is not Chernobyl. It's not that kind of reactor. It was built specifically to avoid a Chernobyl kind of. It's been systematically reinforced. It has extra layers of protection introduced after the Fukushima disaster. It is a very, very safe system as long as this kind of stuff isn't going on. So first you get those kinds of reassurances. And then the kind of level down with that, I would say Ed Lehman, the guy I was speaking to yesterday, he not panic, but kind of saying, look, it's a slow-moving concern and the risks seem to be rising. And he sounded very uncomfortable with that. He certainly wasn't going to be goaded into saying there is going to be a disaster right now. But he did say to me, if this keeps on happening, it's going to be up to the operators and the people on the ground to stop this becoming a Fukushima. So he can see the path to it happening. And then there's the guys on the ground. So we've, my colleague Sergio Olmos, were able to get through to a guy working there who we're keeping anonymous for obvious reasons. And this is this is what he told us yesterday. This is in the middle of all this happening. He said, the sixth block, that's the sixth reactor, it's working to its limit. And by that he means we've reduced it to such a low power output, we can't really reduce it lower, and we're putting strain on it. We're waiting for the line to be restored. The situation right now is very tough. It can only work off its own resources, that's the reactor using its own power to cool itself, for 2 hours. This is not sustainable. If the fire's not put out and the line isn't restored, then the diesel generators will kick in. Even they can only work for 72 hours maximum. We've got 30 to 40 minutes left at best. Now, he told us that at about 5:30 local time, and he later told us we managed it, we didn't have to turn on the diesel. But you can just feel the stress, right, that these guys feel they're under. And people working there have said, the reason I'm still going to work, the reason I haven't left and, kind of keeping my head down, the reason I'm still showing up to work every day is because that, when you are a nuclear engineer working at a place like this, you've got a responsibility to make sure there isn't a nuclear disaster.
Well, thank you very much for that, Roland. Just before we go to Sarah Newey to talk about Somalia and what's happening there, Dom, can I just bring you in very briefly? I mean, coming from the military, do you get much training about how to deal with this sort of thing, or will the militaries of both sides be encountering this as something completely new?
Well, in terms of preparing for some kind of nuclear event, no. I mean, the sort of the training I got was lie down and face away from the blast. It was pretty much wait for both pressure waves to pass over you and then run to a place of safety. So, well, really, I don't think we're going to get past the first sentence. But anyway, not massively, no. I mean, simply because I don't think these kind of areas, this critical national infrastructure, has ever been considered to be legitimate in any way. And I know I've got in trouble with the legitimate word before, so please don't beat me up again. But in terms of a military objective, I mean, there are just some things under the rule of law that you just can't do. I think it might actually be a war crime to attack infrastructure that is critical for human life. I'd have to check that. But no, it just wasn't a military task other than sort of protecting it as an area, as it would be any protection task. And in terms of, we've spoken before about risk and about how you can build only so much redundancy into any of these systems. You'd bankrupt whichever country you're in to make it completely free from all risk. And as Roland was saying, these are very, very well protected plants. Lessons learned from Chernobyl and Fukushima. But it depends what the threat is. And if we remember, just think back to 9/11, and one of the reasons the towers fell, I was told, was because they were designed to put up with an aircraft striking them, but the scenario was an aircraft that was lost in fog trying to land, so a slow-moving aircraft with not very much fuel in it. So the towers were designed to put up with that. What they simply couldn't put up with was a very heavily laden, a fuel-laden aircraft going at max chat. So there's only so much you can do to protect these sites, and ultimately they are extremely vulnerable to high explosive. And the more that these things happen, I think we're beyond the realm now of thinking it's an accident or that there's shelling from both sides. I think this is a card that Putin is holding against Ukraine and against the West, against the world. This is a card he may wish to play at a time of his choosing. So I think it's very, very difficult to say that there's any more protection that could be placed upon it. I mean, it needs to be a demilitarized zone. Trouble with that is a bit like the no-fly zone right at the start of this war. To have a demilitarized zone, you've got to police it, and who's going to go in there? The UN has shown very little appetite. I mean, the IAEA have done sterling work. I think they've still got 2 people in there permanently monitoring it. So they've stepped up in that regard. But in terms of protecting it, I mean, almost impossible to do.
Thank you very much, Dom, for that. And thank you, Roland, for your account of what's happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I'd like to move and invite Sarah Newey to our conversation now. We're going to zoom out of events in Ukraine. Sarah, you've been reporting on food shortages and famine in Africa. You came to talk to us about this several months ago. You're back and the news isn't good. What's happening in Somalia?
Hey, David. Yeah, so the numbers are so big, they're kind of almost hard to fathom. There was a big update yesterday from the UN. They're warning that 7.1 million people, so half of Somalia's population, are facing acute food security, including 213,000 who are in danger of famine. Now, they're actually projecting, famine is a very technical word, but they're projecting that between October and December, so basically by the end of this month, a big region in Somalia, the Bay region, which is in the south, will be in famine. This region was hit hard last time famine was declared in Somalia in 2011, when over 250,000 people died. So a bad situation is basically getting worse, as the country in the Horn of Africa has been hit by the worst drought in 40 years, and they're now predicting that a fifth rainy season will have no rain again, which is unprecedented. Millions of livestock have died. The long-term forecasts aren't looking good for the start of the year. And then on top of that, you've had everything going on with Ukraine, which has really made a bad situation worse.
Well, we'll get on to that. So could you, a couple of months ago, you came to talk to us about what was going on in Somalia. What's changed since you last spoke on this podcast?
So it's basically the scale of the challenge that the region is facing. There's been no rain this summer. There's more failed harvests. And it's just the number of people who are facing food insecurity. 1 million people have been forced from their homes now. I mean, these numbers are huge, aren't they? But one more, at the beginning of this year, the UN thought about 4 million people would need help this year. We're now up to 7. So it's kind of just a compounded, drawn out process in which people aren't getting enough food. There's not enough resources. Although there's a mammoth effort to help, there's not enough resources to help. We've had near total harvest failure. So, they've had 13% of the average harvest this year compared to the last 20. And the prices of food is just skyrocketing. So local cereal, they're now saying, is 234% above average. So all their livestock have died, and that's continuing to happen. They've got no food is being grown, and the food that is available at local markets is 234% higher. They have no income and no ability to buy that small amount of food that is coming through. So it's really just a bad situation, deteriorating, and people are saying, we don't really know where rock bottom is right now.
Well, let's bring in the conflict in Ukraine. Could you talk us through how this is impacting what's going on in Somalia?
Yeah, so there are kind of two main reasons that combine into a third. So the first is, obviously, we've all heard a lot about how, in general, food production has been hit in Ukraine. So there's less food coming out. Ukraine and Russia is, known as a breadbasket. The Horn of Africa in particular imported nearly all of its grain from the Black Sea region. So the blocks that were in place, obviously, hopefully they're being lifted and some food is now getting through. But that meant that there was less food coming in, and at the same time, the crisis has triggered massive inflation across the world, which is helping push those prices ever higher. So kind of the availability and the price of food is one factor. The second is just the amount of help available, right? So there's a war in Europe, there's less money to help contribute to other crises. So the UN is saying that, only about 60% of the money that they need to respond to this has come through. I mean, there's been a bit of a recent surge as the situation has got worse over summer. At a briefing a few weeks ago, the UK was saying, this year they've committed to spending £156 million. So far, 76 million of that has been spent in the Horn of Africa. But if we compare that to 2016, 2017, when Somalia was again on the brink of famine and it was averted, the UK spent more than £800 million that year. So there's less money available because of everything that's going on in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. Food prices have skyrocketed. And if you combine those together, it means that the aid agencies have less money and their money goes less far. So it's kind of, there's just less help really. And the scale of the crisis is huge. And so that's the factors.
You've painted quite a dark picture, quite a daunting picture for the region. Could you talk to us a little bit about what is being done to help people? Where is help coming from at the moment?
Yeah, well, obviously on the Ukraine angle, that's why there's been so much focus from the World Food Programme and others pushing through these grain exports from Ukraine. But organisations are doing a lot. Humanitarian aid is getting through, although in some parts, something we haven't spoken about is, Al-Shabaab is present in huge regions of Somalia, which makes access really difficult in certain areas. But cash transfer schemes are proving very useful, although difficult when the price of food is going up so much. There's also a big emphasis on, the health ramifications, because one of the things that people die of during a famine or a food crisis isn't hunger, it's diseases like cholera. So there is help going in. Humanitarian agencies are working across the region, but it's just the scale just really isn't enough to meet the needs. So there's a lot of comparisons being made to 2011 when a famine was declared. That's one of the few times we've actually had a famine declared this since the millennium. There was a lot more help on offer then than there has been now.
And since you've been following the region and reporting on it, for you, is this the worst in terms of outlook it's seen? Where does this compare to the rest of your reporting on Somalia?
Yeah, so I was in the region back in May, and it was already pretty grim from all accounts. And those who I'm speaking to and still in contact with, it's just got worse. There was a big briefing by the UN yesterday morning, and Martin Griffiths, who's the UN humanitarian chief, was talking very movingly about these children he was seeing, and I've seen pictures of them who just skin and bones. And actually, it's worrying when kids aren't crying because they've got no energy to even cry, and that's what's happening in lots of these facilities at the moment. It's really the children who are going to be worst hit initially, and they're saying that already at least 700, if not more, died. Although keeping tabs on this is difficult, but it definitely seems like it's getting worse.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about this, Sarah. Roland and Dom, you've been listening to this. Do you have any questions for Sarah?
Yeah, I do, please. Hi, Sarah. Great to have you back. I'd just be interested in your view on Russia's activity in the region more widely, and whether or not the whole grain thing that we report on as Russia weaponizing the grain, what action they're then taking at the other end? And do you see Russia in Africa trying to blame the West for this, or just generally, what's their sort of diplomatic footprint in the regions that you've been covering?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. It's one I've spoken a lot about with our Africa correspondent, Will Brown. Definitely, Russia is doing quite well on the propaganda war in Africa, I think. I think there's less of an interest in what's happening directly to Ukraine. People are just hungry, and they see the West not helping as much, and maybe and Russia getting much better across their message in that part of the world. Although, again, when I was there in May, if I'm honest, the people on the ground didn't really care about what was happening in Ukraine. They weren't interested in the war when they're struggling themselves, and it didn't come up that much around people on the ground, bar local officials who were talking again about the aid problem, and lots of people said, we just feel like we've been forgotten about. So yeah, I think it all kind of comes part and parcel of the same issue there, but definitely Russia seemed to be getting their message across much more effectively than Ukraine perhaps are on the ground.
Thanks. And just look, I guess the flip side of that, really. I mean, how is the West viewed? We very quickly reach for the handle, sort of crank the handle and say, well, of course, everyone sees the West's international diplomacy through the lens of Iraq and Afghanistan or what have you. I mean, is that how the West is still seen in this part of the world? And is that to the detriment of aid projects and the flow of humanitarian assistance?
Yeah, I'm sure it is to a degree. I actually think one of the really interesting perceptions of the West at the moment with this is obviously war in Ukraine has made this worse, but climate change in general is hitting this region really hard. And there's quite a lot of frustration that, people in the West are sitting in comfortable houses and they've accelerated this, global warming, etc., but aren't necessarily doing all that much to help as far as lots of people see there. So I think that is a point of tension that's only going to grow in the coming years, because this region is going to be continually hit by drought. Like they're saying now that there could be a long-term forecast look bad for the start of next year. I think the West still does have a good reputation in parts of the region, and obviously there's been a lot of focus on aid, etc. And whenever you see UK aid or anything else, it's always got these massive stickers across, which I guess is part of that soft power diplomacy effort to make people aware of what's being done. But I think that there are lots of conversations in development at the moment about whether aid really is the right way of doing it, and that's why you're seeing more focus on things like cash transfer from aid agencies to give a bit more of a power to people on how they spend the help that they're getting. So it's all part of a broader discussion, isn't it, about really what's the right future and the right model for this in the future. But I think right now people are just kind of desperate for any help they can get, and it doesn't really matter where it comes from.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sarah Newey. Thank you, Dom, for your questions. I realise we've talked a lot about the power plant in Zaporizhzhia. We've talked a lot about the counter-offensive across the northeast and the south. There are a couple of other updates I think Dom at least wants to talk about. So, Dom Nichols, what else have you been looking at?
Yeah, just one more to make people aware of. So for some time now, there's been quite a lot of training of Ukrainian soldiers and also training Ukrainians on and equipment across Europe. The British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who was the Defence Secretary this morning, and we think he's still going to be this afternoon, because of course today Liz Truss has met the Queen, and so we've got a new Prime Minister. So we think Ben Wallace is still going to be the Defence Secretary this afternoon. But he made a statement in the House of Commons this morning on he gave a training update, and he said that so far 4,700 Ukrainians have been trained. This is out of a total at the moment that the British have committed to training 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers in basic training. So as we've discussed before, so this is very low level, essentially working up to pairs, fire and movement. So a soldier and his or her buddy being able to look after each other and move forward in a safe, tactical manner. So 4,700 soldiers trained so far. The training has been extended to 5 weeks, he said. Now, I thought that was interesting, because I did for a little while teach new recruits. I took them through our basic training syllabus here in Britain, and that at the time was 11 weeks. And I don't think it's changed much since then. So if this basic package given to the Ukrainian soldiers is going to be extended to 5 weeks, I think from 4, but even 5 weeks, that's not a huge amount. Now, the reports are from the trainers that the Ukrainians, as you would expect, are incredibly well motivated. They are really setting the pace. The instructors are, I'm told, really enjoying it, because they've got very, very engaged, motivated people who want to learn and are pushing the pace. So maybe 5 weeks. Maybe five weeks training these people are sort of 11 weeks training the people I had to, or maybe I needed 11 weeks to train them. But interested that it's going to be extended. Nearly 5,000 trained so far. He mentioned he paid his respects, gave his thanks to those nations who have supplied trainers, some from each nation here in the UK so far. So that's Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Lithuania, Canada, the Netherlands, New Zealand and Norway. And you may remember last week I met Richard Marles, the Australian Defence Secretary and also Australia's Deputy Prime Minister, and I asked him if we were going to see Australian troops in Britain training Ukrainians, and he said that he was, quote, actively considering, unquote, such a move. So there may be more soon, but I thought it was an interesting update from the training there.
Thanks very much for that, Dom. If there are no more updates to talk about, can I ask you all for your final thoughts? I don't know, Roland or Dom, would you like to go first?
Okay, my final thought, I think we've got to keep an eye on what's happening in the south around this Kherson push, in particular that bulge. I don't want to reach for too many obvious metaphors here, but that bulge around the Inulets River, if that is successful, then there's going to be a huge amount of Russian troops cut off from any kind of resupply. But also keep in the back of your mind what I was saying earlier on about the efforts in the Donbass and in the north. Are they there just taking advantage of local situations? Are they there act as part of a campaign plan to draw Russian forces away from the south, or to stop the increased reinforcement of the south from Russia? So I don't think it's disconnected what's happening across the entire country at the moment. I think it is all part of a wider campaign plan. So see it in those, or try and see it in those areas. So either debunk that theory or back it up. I would suggest.
I would echo what Dom said about the Donbass. I feel like we haven't really been paying attention for it, and I think it is clear the Russians are still pushing. However slowly, they are still pushing out there. We should really, really not forget that front, despite the kind of excitement about Kherson. And as Don has already laid out, I mean, I was just checking the old, Twittery, Telegram kind of places. There's definitely something going on around Kharkiv today. The Ukrainians are kind of trailing it. I'm not sure exactly what's going to emerge, so that's worth keeping an eye on. And really, I'm just going to echo what I said yesterday, which is, okay, right, we've got a new Prime Minister. Her inbox is horrendous, and I was having conversations with people yesterday, trying to glean what others are thinking, and the truth is, the consensus is, this winter is going to be really hard, and we don't really know how our governments, speaking in Britain and in Europe, are going to manage. There is going to be a big push from Russia and its sympathisers to say, look, you're suffering because of your position on Ukraine. And it begins now. It is September. There was a thunderstorm in London last night. I feel like the temperature's already kind of, we're well past the summer heat wave kind of area. So that remains the number one thing I'm chewing over in my mind.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Roland. Sarah Newey, you mentioned you had a few other thoughts. Would you like to sum up what you're thinking and add in anything new?
Well, yeah, I was just going to add to Dom's question about Russia. I think it is really important to keep in our mind that when Zelensky addressed the African Union, only 4 leaders from the continent actually went. There is very deep ties to Russia. And then on what's happening in Somalia, I think echoing what Roland just said, this winter is going to be hard for everyone. And so it does feel like funding is going to be increasingly difficult. I think the way to think about it is, it's been 4 years of 4 years of drought, more failed seasons coming. The UK's ambassador to Somalia said a few weeks ago that the region's resilience is at rock bottom. So I think watch this space for what's going to unfold in October onwards, but it's not looking good.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. And sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message, and we are especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and today on Twitter, Jaden Irving.